Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping items. For anybody, if you have any questions, please put forward your question on the chat box, and we'll try our very best to respond to everyone's questions. And for all the speakers, I ask if you can put yourselves on mute after speaking, and everyone else to be on mute as well. Thank you. So those are some of the housekeeping items. So without further ado, I want to welcome everybody to our webinar session on bringing Abdulrahman home. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Yusuf Fikiri. I am happen to be the brother of Sulaiman Fikiri, where we a story where a young man who had a mental illness and was killed by multiple guards at a jail in Eastern Ontario. At the time of his death, both his legs and his hands were tied. He was pepper sprayed twice. And we've been fighting for justice for Sulaiman for the last 3.5 years. This story is a story that is very important to all of us, the story of our brother Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy, that I think all of us need to heed and pay very close attention to this tragic injustice of a minor. A tragic injustice of a minor. I want to reiterate to everybody that we should hear the story, and that's what tonight is about. I myself, for me, because of what happened to my late brother, who suffered, who was vulnerable, just like our brother Abdulrahman, it's a very important story that we need to listen and we need to learn from the courage work of brother Abdulrahman's dear parents, our brother Osama Al Bahnasawy and Dr. Khadija Ahmed. So Justice for Sully is the organization that I founded after Sulaiman's death. We're asking for accountability into his death for the guards that killed him. And we've been asking for that for the last 3.5 years. The main mandate of the movement is to get charges against the guards who killed him and to make sure that there's people with mental illness are treated appropriately within the confines of the justice system. So that's the mandate of the Justice for Sully movement. But tonight is about our dear brother Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy, and we're here to, we have some very amazing guests that will educate us on the work on the elusive and the ominous term known as entrapment that befell a minor, Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy, and that we'll be learning from the expert, and we'll also be hearing from Sister Khadija and her family's plight in seeking justice and bringing her son home back in Canada. In essence, what is Bring Abdul Home campaign? The campaign is effectively, in short, it's the story of Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy, who's a Canadian citizen, who when he was a minor, suffering with severe mental illness, was entrapped by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In the words of the family counsel, Dennis Edney, and I quote, he has no criminal record. His arrest and sentencing are a travesty of justice. The RCMP unlawfully obtained his medical records and provided them to the FBI to better profile him in manipulating him in a chat room. To date, he has suffered harsh conditions in prison and continuing. Quote, end quote of Mr. Edney. Ladies and gentlemen, when you hear this statement, we have to remember that this could have happened to anybody that's listening here, and this could have happened to your child. And that's why we must commend the El Bahnasawy family for their hard work and courage in speaking out against this travesty as justice, in the words of Mr. Edney. So with that warning in mind, the purpose of our webinar is to shed light on our brother's story, Brother Abdulrahman's case. And the objective of this evening is to have a discussion on Abdulrahman's story, mental health, entrapment, and how to protect our children from entrapment. When I first heard about Mr. Brother Abdulrahman's story, I was, there was many emotions going in my heart because, when I think of someone suffering from mental illness, the first thing that comes to my heart, that comes to my mind, is compassion. This is very important, is compassion. And the second thing is, the way when I think of someone suffering from mental illness and hearing what the story is, what happened, empathy, right? And this story really, it hurt me a lot. It really played a role in terms of affecting me because, as someone who's been personally touched by losing a loved one in the justice system that suffer from mental illness, I felt this was a story that everybody should educate themselves. And so, what's tragic about this story is that the El Bahnasawy family continues to suffer every single day. It's not just today or tomorrow. They suffer every day. And I personally firsthand know that suffering. We buried Suleiman, Allah yarhamu, 3.5 years ago. But we're in pain and we die every day because of how horrible he lost his life. Whereas if you look at the El Bahnasawy family, Abdulrahman is physically alive, but the pain that this family goes through every day, they die every day too. And that's what I was thinking. I wanted to really share the emotions here because this is a young man that was suffering internally, and he's suffering even more now within the context of the external method. And their family is, through their suffering, is leading us in trying to make a difference in being change makers. The reason we came forward, Justice for Sully, and the Bring Abdulrahman Home campaign is that cases, like I said, these are system breakers. These are injustices that have not gone under the radar. Rather, it has sparked families, like the Fikiri family and the Bahnasawy family, to be proactive, courageous, sincere, and to have discussions about these wrongdoings. This is very important for all of us. And this is our humble efforts of doing that within the confines and the context that we have. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sister Dr. Khadija Ahmed, Abdulrahman's mother, to educate us on his story, to shed light on their pain, and to put into context the story of Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy. Thank you so much. I leave the floor to you, dear Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Brother Yusuf, for this introduction and for hosting this webinar. Actually, I would like to confirm that I add my voice to you for supporting your brother Sulaiman and supporting all this kind of injustice which happened to your brother, to my son, because especially mental illness people, they are weak, vulnerable, they don't have voice, and we are the one who defend them. We are the one who pass their voice, their pain, the injustice happened to the people who concern about it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inshallah stand and support us bi'idhnillah. I want also to thank everybody sharing today this webinar and joining us today, for taking the time to hear my son's story, which is one of the top human rights cases in Canada. Our story in brief: we are a Canadian family who came over 20 years ago in search for a better future for our 2 children, like any Canadian family landing on this land. My son Abdulrahman is known by his family and friends of his gentle soul and loving person. Abdulrahman had many dreams like any other youth. One of his big dreams is wanted to grow up to be an engineer. When he turned 14, he began to experience mental health issues. Some of these symptoms including depression, racing thoughts, troubling sleeping, and excessive energy. Unfortunately, this mood instability resulted in a substance abuse and suicidal thoughts. As a kid-loving family, we all were very concerned about this. And imagine, for 3 years, we took him from one hospital to the other in 3 different countries, including Canada, trying to help him overcome his addiction and understanding where his symptoms were coming from. Finally, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and obsessive disorder. Also, he has something called looping, when Abdulrahman's brain circles back to an idea over and over again, and that idea becomes very rewarding and gratificating for him, and it fills a part of his cognitive functioning, his thinking. So after that, we were so excited as he was finally placed on the right medication, and we were able to manage his mood swings. After that, he became more social, loved interacting with people, but unfortunately the medication was causing him to gain weight, and he was always drowsy. At this point now, he was 17. But under medication, he went back to school. As a teenager, he faced a lot of abuse and bullying from his friends because of his weight gain. So he kept taking medication because he was so happy that he has a stable mood swing. But he did a very restrictive diet to lose weight. He ate only 1 meal a day. But the breaking point was when students in his class made fun of him when he slept in the classroom, saying the medication made him sleepy. He really felt so disappointed and refused to take the medicine until a better one was prescribed to him. We understand his disappointment, and we placed him on a waiting list at Cambridge for a review of his medication. At this point, he spent a lot of time in his room doing online chatting or games. We were okay with this, and we were less worried about this because he was staying away from drugs, and that made him busy of having these suicidal thoughts. But on the other hand, we chose to hire a private physician for help and found an appointment after 2 days of his arrest. Now at this point, he had just turned 18, and we needed to cheer him up before meeting the psychologist. So we decided to go in a family vacation to the United States. In our trip to United States, we crossed the border without any issues. As soon as we arrived our hotel in New Jersey, after like 9 or 10 hours driving, we were surrounded by FBI agents. At the beginning, I thought they are gangs kidnapping kids. So I ran to them crying, "Who are you? Why you take my son? Why you take my sick son?" And I hug my son and I want to grab him from their hands. They told us we were a good family, but they need to question my son for chatting online. In a glance, he was gone with them in a big, huge black car. They left us in the darkest street, confused, scared, so worried about our sick son who never slept over away of his family. I want you to just 1 second think about the feeling of us in this moment. What second now. Just think about the feeling for me as a mother, for his dad. And we know our son is sick at this moment. Next day, we were astonished that he was in court and charged with 7 charges of conspiracy and shipping material. We were shocked. How come my son with mental illness, who was isolated in his room, have been involved in such accusations? He has no violent or criminal past. He was so quiet boy. Through the trial, we began to understand what had happened. At some point, his teacher assigned the class a research project about Islamic Caliphate, and Abdulrahman started to research the topic on his laptop. He spent hours and hours and days doing this project. His opening symptoms from his mental health took over. And he wasn't under medication at this time. He eventually found himself on websites and chats with people expressing extremist views against the West, especially the United States. This is where all started. He was targeted by an FBI undercover agent. And of course, Abdulrahman's mental illness made him an easy target for entrapment. And the more sad thing, that the both agencies, the FBI and the RCMP, were aware about his mental illness, because later on we found out that the RCMP had unlawfully accessed my son's Cambridge file and provided it to the FBI before our traveling. You cannot imagine how in some chatting records the agents used all kind of emotional influence to engage Abdulrahman in radical discussions, such as the mistreatment of Muslims by the United States, and drag him into hyper chatting, like videos about the US killing innocent people. And by the way, those chats have been published on global news titled "Undercover the Informant Encouraged the Vulnerable Canadian." And the FBI, because the FBI needed Abdulrahman to take one action, so they can charge him, they got Abdulrahman to order from online to online, cleaning chemicals and Christmas lights. This kind of cruel and lawful entrapment is confirmed by Abdulrahman's lawyer, Dennis Edney, Andrew Fresh, and many other criminal lawyers. It is also one of the big concerns for Human Rights Watch and journalists, investigators like Trevor Aroniston have written about this common, cruel, inhuman entrapment in his book, Terror Factor, Inside the FBI's Manufactured War in Terrorism. Moreover, the Canadian Supreme Court ruled against the RCMP and determined this kind of inhuman entrapment to be illegal, as seen in BC case. This kind of violations is repeated by the RCMP, and it destroyed many families. Some of them wrote many books, like Dr. Monia, Hope and Despair. The story didn't finish here. There were many violations to Abdulrahman's rights. Abdulrahman's case was immediately sealed, which didn't allow us to get any help or interference from outside. They placed They placed a federal defender to represent Abdulrahman, who warned us against speaking to anyone, even the Canadian embassy or government or any Canadian lawyers. His detention was harsh with abusive conditions, including solitary confinement and severe restrictions in communicating with us. He also didn't receive the proper medical and mental health treatment he requires, as the American prison don't offer such medication and services, despite his many attempting to suicide in the prison. My son was so scared. My son was so scared, vulnerable. He was isolated in solitary confinement, and he was taken advantage of. And his federal defender convinced him to plead guilty because it would get him out of solitary confinement, and thus was better for him. Without informing us, she took him to the court, and it was done. The boy pleaded guilty. Later on in prison, he heard in the prison that his federal defender was known to work closely with the FBI. Even though Abdulrahman wanted another lawyer, guess what? The court wouldn't let him change the federal defender. The court wouldn't let him change the federal defender. And as a result of all this mess, Abdulrahman, the mental illness boy, who was entrapped by FBI and RCMP, knowingly that he was sick, was sentenced to 40 years. 40 years in prison. Of course, this excessive sentence didn't take into account his age, mental health, and mitigating factors that doctors testified at sentencing. "40 years in prison." We are now a family living with broken heart. It is very difficult for us as parents for a boy with mental illness who was arrested this unfair way. And at the same time, we need to work. We cannot just, if I'm a mother, if I'm an only mother, I cannot talk to you now. I cannot talk to you now. I cannot talk to you now. Maybe I sit on the corner and cry, but talk? No, but why I'm talking? I'm talking to protect my sick victim son. I'm talking to protect our youth. I am talking to protect Canada's future. We put an active complaint against the RCMP with the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, by the way. And we have started a campaign to raise awareness about our son's story and to ultimately bring Abdulrahman back to Canada. And to make you aware of what may happen to your son. Think about it. Does anybody knows his son or daughter doing on the internet? Does anybody knows that? So when you go any trip, anywhere, you just arrest your son or daughter because they were doing chatting on the internet, especially if they are mentally ill? But bury them alive in prison, bury them alive in prison, and they know they are mental illness? I consider this a criminal, a crime against our youth from the FBI and the RCP. And we need to stand and stop this. We need our government, Canada, to stand and say no.
Yes, I agree.
Get the good people in the RCMP and to stand and say no. We are the only supporter to my sick son. We go and visit him when visitors are allowed. It takes us 13 hours each way to visit him. sometimes 20 hours. And according to the press indication, sometimes he's so far, we take the airplane if we have the money. When we visit him, we find him shackled in chains, and we speak to him behind the glass wall. We are not even allowed to hug or kiss our mental illness boy. The US prison environment is extremely harsh, especially for a young boy with mental disorder, and my son attempted suicide many times in prison. This tough environment is a threat again for my son's life. We need to bring Abdulrahman back to Canada. My son is tortured mentally and physically. Also, US prison doesn't have the mental and medical treatment care that needs, as the US prison priority is US citizen. This is confirmed, by the way, and testified by Dr. Amir Ataran from University of Ottawa in the trial. Abdulrahman needs to be supported by his loving family and caring family in a system that provides him with the medical treatment he needs. This is the reason, guys, we are here in Canada for our kids. How come that happened to our kids in this land? My son's transfer is allowed under the International Transfer of Offenders Act. If only Canada intervenes and fight for his return. And you know what? We expect nothing less from Canada, the country that defends human rights around the world. Canada, our government. How about Canadians? How about mental illness youth Canadians?
Absolutely.
Want and need, I'm sorry, Fakiri, I have only few. I need to finish this. We need our son back. Canada is responsible to bring him back home and to prevent Abdulrahman's same situation from happening to other Canadians. Abdulrahman's safety is about our kids' safety and future. This human rights case should be a concern for the Canadian government, media, and all Canadians. And we urge Canadian government and public to help us. We need your help. Please bring Abdulrahman home. Please help us to bring Abdulrahman home. Abdulrahman's safety is our youth safety, is our safety for Canada's future. Thank you for taking time to listen. Thank you, Yusuf, for waiting for me.
Thank you for your courage. Thank you for honoring us, for educating us, through your journey of pain as you go through every day, and and building a better society for us as Canadians here and across the world. Your pain, although many of us cannot, I don't think most people, maybe with the exception of Sister Monia and my mother, could really understand what you're going through. But I do know everybody sees your pain and they see this tragic plight. You are not alone. We are here, as there is many people in this conversation that are here to support you and support Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy. I want everybody, ladies and gentlemen, to look at the pain of Khadija Ahmed. I want everybody to take a second here. That this family, the pain that this family is going through, don't think that this cannot happen to another Canadian family. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, this could have happened to anyone, but it happened to the El Bahnasawy family, and they've taken the courage and the painful effort of speaking their story. When I think about Brother Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy and I see the pain of Sister Khadija, I think of my mother. I think of my mother who many years spent speaking to different doctors, leading the charge to give Suleiman, Allah yarhamu, the help that he needed, the pain that he went through. And it was that assistance, that unflinching, unwavering love that a mother gave to her vulnerable son that kept my late brother alive for 11 years later. And I think this is very important in that, like, with respect to mental illness, I'm not a doctor. I'm not an educator when it comes to the illness itself, but I have experience in knowing the pain is that when you think of someone suffering from mental illness, the most significant aspect of someone, when someone is suffering from mental illness is family support. They took Suleiman's family support away. He was only there for 11 days. Now, when we look at Brother Abdulrahman's illness, the family support that they've taken away, I warn everybody here, that is literally between life and death, right? And this is something that we all need to understand, right? What Sister Khadija is telling us through her pain is not just the injustice, but the fact that every day and slowly Abdulrahman's condition is deteriorating because there's many things going on here. One, he's a non-US national living in the United States. Two, the fact that Osama and Sister Khadija cannot see him, that they literally have to travel for long distances, goes a long way in his health deteriorating by the minute. And so when I'm hearing this story, I'm hearing multiple things. One, there's a lot of work for us to do as a community, as Canadians at large. Anybody who has a loved one with respect to mental illness has a stake in the story. Anyone who has some semblance of compassion and understanding the strong civic engagement of what justice stands for has a stake in this story. Anyone who believes in that society to be tempered by compassion has a stake in this story. Now, when you look at the conditions of what Brother Abdulrahman is going through, solitary confinement, no proper medication, no mental health treatment, no family calls, lack of commissary money, and therefore lack of essential items, harsh punishment for minor infractions, and torture. Now, when I look at this list, the first three, solitary confinement, no proper medication, no proper mental health treatment, no family calls. This is carbon copy to what happened to Suleiman. This is carbon copy to what happens to Canadians every day. Every day, Canadians suffer through these things, people that suffer through mental illness within the prison system. This is carbon copy. And so as a nation and as a society, we have to truly have to worry about this when there's a Canadian national in foreign territory that's suffering through this. And with the solitary confinement, I want to add here something very important. And Dr. Mazir will probably talk more of this, and so will probably Brother Khalil or Hassan Shibli as well, is that under the United Nations Convention on Human Rights, putting anyone who's not even suffering from mental illness more than 15 days is considered torture. Okay, Suleiman was put into solitary confinement for 11 days at the Central East. It's a jail in Eastern Ontario. So this is very important. These are human rights that are being abused every day. And I think all of us, we need to think about these big concepts for us to understand that they're being infringed on, in this. So with that, with these things in mind, I wanted to, before I transition to entrapment, I wanted to get a couple of excerpts from doctors, and also an excerpt from a friend at CAMH that was a friend of Abdulrahman. Dr. Catherine Porterfield, clinical instructor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and senior psychologist at NYU Program for Survivors of Torture, who worked with Abdulrahman since January 2017 for a year or so, testified in court. Quote, "Actually, really the most important work with Mr. El Bahnasawy has been watching him come to understand himself and come to understand that he's suffering with mental illness. Mental illness can be a lifelong condition, but is also, we have abundant evidence of that ongoing treatment, identification of where the problem areas are, and real support works, and that people do get well," unquote. Another quote from Dr. John Mariani, research a psychiatrist at New York State Psychiatric Institute and associate professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia University's Medical Center of Psychiatry, who worked with Abdulrahman since 2017, testified, "I have certainly seen in my work with him reason to be optimistic about his future. And certainly my professional opinion is that treatment of substance use problems and psychiatric conditions in general is a worthwhile in many cases results in good outcomes." Now I want to leave the last part before I get to Brother Khalil. There's an excerpt from Abdulrahman's friend. And I want everybody to listen to this carefully. "Abdul was a dear friend of mine. Abdul is a wonderful man who needs help, not to be forgotten in a cell. He comforted me in my darkest hour, and I wish I could find a way to help him. Abdul is not a monster. He's a human and was a child when this all happened. Abdulrahman is a young man with mental illness with no history of violence. He needs support from his family, community, and mental health services that are available in Canada, unlike the United States." He put context into the human man that Abdulrahman was, the young man that he was. I think this is very important for us to keep in mind when we're looking at individuals suffering from mental illness. Now, with all that in mind, I'm honored to introduce our first guest speaker, who will be talking about entrapment. For many Canadians, the term entrapment is something not really heard of, but it's something very common. Entrapped in layman terms is defined as this: when law enforcement are actively involved in influencing a defendant into committing a crime that they would not have done otherwise. The most notable example in our country in recent times is the BC terror case, where after John Nuttall and Amanda Korody, a couple, was found guilty by a jury in BC, the BC Supreme Court decided to overturn the verdict on the grounds that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police took advantage of their vulnerabilities and induced them to commit the offense. However, entrapment is a common practice in the United States, which has been exposed by many organizations such as the Human Rights Watch. To understand better what entrapment is, and I will introduce our first speaker, Brother Khalil Meek. Khalil Meek is the Executive Director of Muslim Legal Fund of America, MLFA, which is leading the struggle against anti-Muslim injustice in US courtrooms. So without further ado, thank you for your patience, Brother Khalil Meek. I'll leave the floor to you. Please educate us.
I thank you for hosting this program, and first I want to give my condolences to Khadija, Osama, the family, yourself and your mother, and everybody who's having to deal with this issue, because I've been dealing with families who have been going through this issue for the last nearly 20 years, since 2001. After 9/11, the United States, and I don't know Canadian law, and I'm not up to speed on cases in Canada, so I can't speak to that. But here in the US, the problem of Abdulrahman has been, for the lack of a better term, an epidemic, a pandemic in America. And we have a legal precedent called the Material Support Statute that allows law enforcement to be preemptive in the US, meaning you prior to 9/11, you had to commit a crime, you actually had to break the law, and then they catch you, punish you, and put you in jail. After 9/11, the new theory of law enforcement is preemptive law enforcement in response to terrorism, so that as to not suffer the consequences of terrorism, law enforcement has to prevent terrorism. And to do that, they have to act before it happens. So they can't wait for terror, they have to be preemptive. So in order to be preemptive, they are catching people, prosecuting people before a crime happens. Technically, prior to 9/11, that would never happen. You don't have thought crimes. And yet it is a real, it is a valid, and it is a confirmed legal theory that exists today. So what Abdulrahman has been subjected to is a thought crime. And all that was needed to arrest him was one act that is considered in furtherance of a conspiracy. And those shipping the supplies or whatever was enough for the government to say, hey, you've now committed terrorism. And the letter of the law, that's what happened in their minds. Now, we're talking about entrapment. You read the definition. That's still the definition in the US. But there has not been one court in the US that has allowed or upheld the defense of entrapment in cases not exactly like Abdulrahman, but very similar. Sister Khadija brought up a book written by an award-winning author, an investigative journalist named Trevor Aronson. Trevor Aronson researched all the cases across the US that involved an informant. And he studied the cases after the fact, and he found that all the cases that had an informant ended up, it was the informant who came up with the idea for terrorism. It was the informant who instigated the plot, who carried on and carried on and carried on until at some point he was capable of enticing the whoever his audience was into saying verbally and doing things to break the letter of the law so that they could be arrested for material support of terrorism. And had it not been for the FBI, the informant, their resources, their plot, and all of their effort to do so, none of these crimes would have been committed by the defendant. And the government, even though that has been presented in court and has been argued by some of the best attorneys in America, no court and no jury has yet accepted that defense, because the government's response to that is, all we did was bring out of the defendant or the alleged defendant what existed in them prior to it. So they're saying that what existed inside of each one of these people was the urge to commit terrorism. And all the instigation, all the money, all the conniving, all the lying, all of the entrapment was only bringing out what already existed. So that theory from the government has succeeded in every instance in these types of cases to date in the US. So it's not a valid, or it's not been a successful legal defense to claim entrapment. Even though the practice is abhorrent, it needs to be exposed, it needs to be discussed, because you give me enough money, enough time, and bad intention, and I can take anybody's kid, any vulnerable person, any people in society, and lead them down a path to break a law. And if I can't find everybody, I can find somebody. And this is a very horrible practice. It is an unethical practice, in my opinion, but it is something that nonetheless is very prevalent. In Abdulrahman's case, he has two paths to pursue at the moment, and both cannot be pursued at the same time. The family, and I understand why, wants him in Canada tomorrow. They want him to receive his health care, his medicine, for every reason that Khadija mentioned. It is imperative that he be, if he's going to serve time and be in custody, Canada's where it should be. That cannot happen under US law until he ceases to have any legal proceedings in US court. So if he's going to fight his conviction in any way, then he will not be, they won't consider the moving of his case or his presence out of the US. So, and when he does, if he does move to Canada, there is no commuting of sentence or arguing or any legal precedent to help him other than giving him his medicine once he's in Canada. So those are two different things. And I believe the family's wanting to have all their legal options open to them at the moment. And we are an organization that are looking at that and will discuss that with them moving forward. But the advocacy needs to be clear in Canada at the moment, exposing what I think you call it the Royal Canadian Police, the tactic, the practice of entrapment needs to be exposed. It needs to be talked about. It needs to be heard. It needs to be felt. Applying it to an argument to bring him home would be counterproductive at the moment. So exposing is good unless you just want him home, because the two are different things. So that needs to be clear. I'll stop here, and because I think we have a lawyer on the phone with us. We have Hassan Shibli, who's been doing this as a very long time himself, and I'd like for him to weigh in, and then maybe we can complement each other on this topic. So
thank you so much, Brother Khalil, for educating us. I think you might have left myself and a couple of us with some questions to ask later, but thank you for that. I think, yeah, it's fitting we move to, it seems, like I said, it seemed, like you said, this seems to be a very, it's a very innocuous term. It's a very innocuous term, this idea of entrapment. And so hopefully we can get more information as Brother Hassan Shibli, who I'm about to introduce, civil rights attorney, executive director at the Council on American Islamic Relations in Florida, and Institute for Social Policy and Understanding Education.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you all hear me? MashaAllah, Brother Khalil, MashaAllah, it's an honor to share this panel with you, and I want to thank you for the tremendous service that you've done for the Muslim community. MLFA is one of our strongest allies and is honestly one of the most important institutions for Muslims in North America, because you guys do take on cases similar to these where people, frankly, are just too scared, and that's why the government has been so successful for so long in these cases, because people are often too scared to challenge the government, to hold them accountable, and to stand up for people similar in this situation who, frankly, are taken advantage of. And the problem is the double standard that the government engages in. And I genuinely believe the more people speak out and are involved in standing against these cases and resisting these cases, the more success we will have. In Florida, we had a white American Christian man call a masjid and threaten to blow up the entire mosque, threaten to kill the children, to kill the elders. And the FBI immediately arrested him and gave him a slap on the wrist. I believe he served less than a year in jail. Had that been a Muslim man who had called and threatened to blow up a synagogue, the FBI would not have arrested him. They would have sent somebody undercover to give him a bazooka, which comes with a mandatory 40-year sentence, and given him at least 40 years in jail and foiled such a tremendous plot and blown it up all over the news. This is the double standards, that unfortunately our community is facing with. And, I've been involved in a number of cases in terms of assisting people that have been wrongfully labeled as terrorists and charged as such. And, I was shocked at the level of incompetence on the level of the government in these cases. So one of the most notable cases we're involved with, and I want to thank Charlie Swift to provide a lot of background support throughout that case, supported by MLFA. So thank you for that, was the case of Abu Tawbah. You had an imam who in that case was facing 20 years in jail as an alleged terrorist. And the conditions they put him in are horrible. I remember visiting him in jail. His hands were chained, his feet were chained, his legs were bleeding from being in chains 24/7. He was in isolation. And I was like, what evidence do they have that you're supportive of terrorism? And he told me, Hassan, just my possession of Islamic literature. He had a library of 10,000 Islamic books, 5 or 6 of which the government didn't like. And, his teaching the Quran and his reading some ayahs at the end of his khutbah that are found within the Quran that every imam may read. And to be honest, it was just so blatantly wrong. I almost, I almost didn't believe him, and I went to the sentencing hearing to see what evidence they had on him. And I was shocked at what I saw. It was literally things that we all do, things that each and every one of us do, books that we all have. And I was flabbergasted, for lack of a better word. And I remember the U.S. attorney, the top federal prosecutor, was in the room along with every other FBI agent. And on the Muslim side, were very few Muslims. People were too scared to come up and show up and support. And I remember yelling at the U.S. attorney across the courtroom, which is something you're not supposed to do, but I couldn't keep it in. I said, you're destroying the Constitution. If you get him, you're going to get us all. And he remained quiet. And he was a man I had a lot of respect for. And I remember he called me the next day on a secure line and said, Hassan, you think I can effing control this case? I can't. It comes from DC. And I know what they're doing to the Muslim community is wrong. And he then named case after case where Muslims were in similar situations and how wrong they were. But he said, listen, I have to do my job. I'm not going to lose my job over this. And, whether I'm here or not, it's going to happen. So you got to do your job and you have to fight and defend. And I remember sitting in that courtroom and seeing just the garbage the government so-called terrorism experts were saying, and the garbage their Islam experts were saying. They knew nothing. Anybody with a Sunday school education could tear them apart. And alhamdulillah, we did. We went in that trial and we told the government, the judge, I'm like, Your Honor, if you throw him in jail, you'll have to throw us all in jail. And alhamdulillah, the judge ruled in his favor, released him. And what that got me thinking, and the imam who was freed said the same thing. He said, if you, MLFA, if you guys weren't involved and you just let the government run with their narrative and didn't challenge it, for sure they would have thrown the book at me. And I got to thinking, how many other cases where we couldn't be there, was the government able, with flimsy evidence, with garbage evidence, with circumstances of entrapment, able to do this? So this is why it's so important. We're vigilant. We're present at every case. We're holding the government accountable. I'm really glad you mentioned the work of Trevor Aronson. He's a phenomenal journalist. And subhanAllah, in that book, he mentions that 18 out of 20 cases, this is the ratio, 18 out of 20 cases where a Muslim in the US is accused of terrorism, both the idea and the means came from a paid government informant, and that these individuals would not have been able to do the plots they allegedly did without the government doing it. And in one case in particular, the judge said, this defendant's buffoonery was so Shakespearean in scope that no real terrorist would have ever bothered recruiting him. So they often play, it's the same profile. I've seen it again and again. They play on those who are mentally ill, who need mental assistance, who need psychiatric help. And instead of assisting them, they put them in very wrong circumstances. They take advantage of it. And the crazy thing is, the conversations aren't even recorded initially. So they don't capture that brainwashing, that entrapment phase. They just get it at the end. And as you put so well, give us a little money and just a little time, and we can go in any sort of neighborhood and recruit a young disenfranchised black person or a young disenfranchised white person and get them saying some things they shouldn't for money, which is how it is a lot of the times, or just playing on their emotional state. And you make a big case out of it when really they were never a threat to begin with. So this is reflective, unfortunately, of a broader problem, and it's something we really need to be vigilant about pushing back against. And in terms of the agents involved, I mean, I remember in right now, one of our most recent cases in Orlando, the FBI actually killed a Muslim that they were questioning in their home. And a lot of this starts when we talk about preventative care. It's very important that you never speak to somebody without a lawyer, because that's how the FBI gets these people that ultimately act as informants and ultimately act to entrap others. It's very important. We say it a million times, never speak to the FBI without a lawyer. So in the case of Ibrahim Todashev, they wanted to question him. He said, I got nothing to hide. So he agreed to meet with the agents. And the agent, Aaron McFarlane, ended up shooting him 3 times in the back, 3 times in the front, once in the top of the head, killing him. And when we investigated, it was crazy. One of the most famous African-American journalists called me. He was with the Washington Post. He said, Hassan, I wish the man they killed was a black man, because then the black community would have stood up and protested. Whereas in your Muslim community, the FBI has killed somebody or they charge him with terrorism, they destroy his life, and you guys are quiet and you accept it. You need to resist and hold them accountable. And so we did investigate, and our investigation shed a lot of insight into the entrapment process. First of all, a lot of this person who they killed, his friends that were survivors, they told us straight up that the FBI agent said, listen, you have to spy on hookah lounges, mosques, and halal restaurants, or we'll take away your paperwork and we'll throw you in jail. So they're very aggressive in forcing people to become informants. I remember a well-respected imam, they showed him pictures of a naked woman and said, listen, this woman will testify you're using her for prostitution unless you work for us and spy in your community for us. So these are the tactics. And what kind of FBI agents they're using? They're not using saints. The Aaron McFarlane, the government tried to hide his identity. Working with the Boston Globe, we were able to uncover his identity. We discovered that before he was going around door to door trying to force Muslims to become informants and then ultimately killing somebody who apparently refused to become an informant, he was actually in the state of basically he was sued twice and investigated 4 times for beating up suspects, beating up witnesses, and falsifying evidence. And it was that kind of crooked FBI agent that ultimately became, was working to recruit informants. And again, it isn't just informants, but they're agent provocateurs. They work to entrap and create. And I actually spoke to one on his deathbed. There was a Muslim man in Tampa who worked in the Sami Asmakach case. Now, Sami, again, was convicted 40 years of trying to do some crazy thing. I saw him in jail before he went to serve his full sentence. When I went to visit him, he was naked in jail. Why? Because they said he was mentally unwell, mentally unhealthy, and he was on suicide watch, so they couldn't give him clothes. And I sat with him. I could tell he's not there. He's not mentally okay, yet he's the one they said deserved 40 years in jail. And straight up, the Muslim guy on his deathbed before he died admitted to me that, yeah, I mean, I was paid by the government to tell, to really push him in another direction, to get him to agree to do things he wouldn't have done on his own. So this is a problem. We have to resist it. And I want to thank MLFA's work on that. And inshallah, we pray for the family. It's true, unfortunately, in the US especially, it hasn't been easy to overcome these entrapment cases. But the culture is changing, and I think people are having less trust and respect and tolerance for the government's narrative. And that's why it's critical we continue to challenge it and stand united against it. And bi-idhnillah, we will be successful in assisting those currently suffering and hopefully preventing others from becoming victims of this unjust program that unjustly targets our community.
Thank you so much, Brother Hassan, Brother Hassan Shibli, for educating us. And I think speaking very forthright and with conviction, also with zeal and firm on the fact that we, a couple of very important points that I think Brother Hassan brought up before I move to the next speakers for us to think about. They play on those who are mentally ill, right? Play on those who are mentally ill. These are vulnerable individuals, ladies and gentlemen, and this could have happened to anybody. Brother Khalil talked about this as well, right? This is very important. That's why this could happen to anybody. And the second thing, what Brother Hassan brought up as well, is that within the sub-Canadian community, it's important to advocate, right? Vis-a-vis whether it's the Muslim community or generally if anybody has any links, in the importance of human rights, we need to all be courageous and advocate within the confines of human rights, right? Not just the Muslim community stand, because this is a Canadian issue. This is an American issue. This is a human rights issue. And I got that from Brother Hassan, but the most important message here, outside of the advocacy, is that they play on the mentally ill, the vulnerable. This is very important. That's why we have to, push this and support the El Bahnasawy family and Sister Khadija and Brother Osama. Anyways, without further ado, I'm honored and grateful to introduce someone who I consider a teacher, a dear friend, who I learned a lot in the work of advocacy, and who remains an inspiration to me personally, and for our community. And that's Dr. Mona Mazigh. She doesn't need more introduction than that, but I will say some of the other things, because Mona is truly a leader in our community. And Mona Mazigh is an academic, author, and human rights advocate. She was the former national coordinator of the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group. Dr. Mazigh holds a PhD in finance from McGill University. She was matriculated into the public stage in 2002 when her husband, Maher Arar, was deported to Syria, where he was tortured and held without charge for over a year. She campaigned tirelessly for his release. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome dear sister, Dr. Mona Mazigh.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. Thank you very much. Thank you also for Sister Khadija, and I really appreciate what you are doing on behalf of all of us, but also to secure the the due process and the fair treatment and for your son. I really, really, really hope and pray that that your efforts are not going in vain, and I'm sure, inshallah, that they will not go in vain. Thank you for having me here. I think after hearing the previous speakers, I would have a little bit here more of, actually I have two major points I would like to make. We heard about, of course, mental health, and I think it is important to keep always going back to that idea that those are people who need our protection, who need our support, and how the manufacturing of terrorism or the fabrication of these terrorism cases are considering them as major really target in their sort of fabrication or process of fabricating terrorism. But I think also dealing with these cases are not at all usual cases. They are not, I mean, from outside, from far, people would consider them as, yeah, this is like a criminal case. This is, you know, we are talking here about bombs and we are talking about harming people. But at the base of these cases, there is a new understanding of the word after 9/11. And I think Mr. Khalil Meek mentioned that these things did not happen before 9/11, but do happen, and they are considered okay by judges, by prosecutors. So we are talking here about a new sort of a framework, and we have to work within that framework. A lot of people think that, of course, I mean, ideally we have to break that idea, but before going and before getting there, we have to work within that unfortunate framework. So I think that's one thing. They are not normally sort of criminal cases, so we cannot tackle them the way they have been tackled in other cases. That means, oh, we hire a lawyer and then we are going to put our trust into the justice system and wait for a fair sort of a verdict. It doesn't work like that. So knowing that these are not normal cases, we have to have a different approach to these cases. We have to have a different sort of dealing with these cases. And I think one of the, I mean, this is a personal sort of an opinion, but it is based somehow on several cases and several experience, like several years of experience, is that advocacy is very, very important. Like if you take someone who killed someone else, I mean, how are you going to advocate other than, you know, hire a lawyer and then, you know, have some sort of a due process? However, if we are talking about someone who is mentally ill, someone who is really like, but also not only that, we are talking about journalists who are already into that framework of terrorism, you know, without any end. We are talking about lawyers, you know, we are talking about government lawyers who are into that sort of a framework. We are talking about judges. So I'm not here saying that they are all brainwashed. Nevertheless, the proof is that in the United States, there have been 0 cases that succeeded where to prove that it was entrapment. And in Canada, there is only 1 case, and let me here be honest with you, those are 2 white Canadian, and I have no doubt that the fact that they were white Canadian, they got a lot of sympathy, and you know, at least, you know, not, I wouldn't say sympathy, I would say the bias that would work for others who are brown, Muslim, from other countries, wouldn't work in the case of these 2 white Canadian. So I think, and that's quite clear that among all the cases that we have here in Canada, where there was either terrorism charges or there was the argument of entrapment has been actually mentioned and has been brought up by the lawyers, but it did not work for the unfortunately it did not work in those cases. I mean, I would like to remind you an important case here in Canada. That's the case of Shihab Sagayer and Raed Jasser. It's known as the Via Rail plot. And Shihab Sagayer, he is someone, I mean, with documented mental illness. He is, when he was when he was in court, he came and told the judge, I don't want to be judge according to the Canadian law. I mean, he was really somehow in some sort of a delirium asking to be judged according to the Sharia law. I mean, which is really like, it can tell a little bit about the state of mind he was. Nevertheless, this guy was accused, he was convicted, and then as well as the other person who was with him. And the judge didn't even want to take, the Canadian judge didn't want even to take into consideration the fact that he has a mental health issue, and they were documented. And so I think this is also, the same thing is happening also in Canada. All the, and I'm saying that out of my sort of personal knowledge of some of the terrorist cases, many of the terrorist cases in Canada are also based on either entrapment or agent provocateur or an informant who is also going, and we are not here talking necessarily about including some sort of mental health issues as well. So we are talking about young people who are very super frustrated, super, a lot of disappointment, a lot of also ignorance in terms of political affairs and foreign international affairs. And then they have been encouraged by someone who is an informant, who has also a lot of issues, sometimes criminal issues, sometimes like, money issues, financial issues. And they are, he's going to be pushing these young men into buying and committing, or even like plotting. So we have here in Canada, it's not as much as well documented. Unfortunately, we don't have enough good journalists, or we don't have enough courageous journalists to talk about these issues, or independent journalists to talk and write about these issues. I mentioned, and I talked to some of the journalists I know over the years about the importance of investigative piece about entrapment in Canada. And we didn't have that yet. So it is good that at least in the US, they are, I mean, yes, cases are sometimes seen from Canada as worse, but at the same time, the work that has been done advocating for this is much better as well. So I think to go back to my first sort of idea is that because these are not usual cases, because they are most of the time politically motivated, I think we have to approach them in a different way. And I think what Khadija and Osama are doing is very important. You are basically speaking out, and I totally support what you are doing, because speaking out is maybe the most important thing that, of course, I mean, there is the legal side, but also there is this advocacy, the public side that should be really addressed and should be strategically addressed. And a lot of people in Canada do not know about these things because they think that it happens only to the bad people, but they don't understand that it can happen to the vulnerable people, it can happen to their kids. I mean, the proof, John Natal, you know, he is a white man, and then he converted to Islam, and then they tried to entrap him. So it can happen, but the media does not speak about it a lot. So it is really like low on the radar. So people do not really have any idea about it. But even when they speak about it, it is mentioned as, you know, as a sort of an incident, as like an isolated, whereas we are talking here about a pattern. We are talking about here a systematic, you know, a whole system that is made and organized in a fashion that is going to fail the most vulnerable. So we talk about here racism, we talk about Islamophobia, we talk about you know, mental health, lack of protection. So we talk about a lot of these things that are come in a package, and they are, you know, in a way, when they deliver it, it is under just the name of terrorism. So I think it is important to keep what you are doing, because it is really an important matter. Yes, it can feel frustrating. It can feel, oh, we are doing this without a result. But I remember myself in 2003, that's really like long ago, 17 years ago, 2 years or 1 year after 9/11. And imagine the whole sort of atmosphere at that time. Nobody had any sympathy, no whatsoever, with, you know, Muslim, or with when you brought the case of terrorism. But still, to be able to do that and to be able to speak about it, because I think what we have to understand is that your message is a true message. You are not really just, you know, saying something that is against, it is common sense, and people should, and first of all, hear it, and they are going to understand that this is common sense. You take someone who is not feeling well, you kind of provoke or whatever, you know, feed him and put voices into their head, and then after that, basically you are, I mean, you are fabricating it. You are creating something that does not exist, or at least that exists at a very, very low level, and then you are amplifying it and making it as a threat. So I think it is important to speak out. The lawyer that spoke a few before me mentioned that as a Muslim community, and I speak because I have met families, and many, many families since 2002 up to today, about the first reaction. And you know that the intelligence agencies and the police agencies, they know that the Muslim community are scared. So they kind of, you know, play on that ground that we are going to arrest them and nobody is going to speak on their behalf because everybody is going to be scared. And that's the truth. So I think we have to break that. We have to break, I mean, what we are asking here is we are asking the law to be applied fairly. And right now, the law has not been applied fairly because, you know, we have created an environment where all the fairness has been somehow removed, or at least, you know, put aside. So I think speaking out is an important. And I remember someone who gave me an advice when my husband was in prison. He said to me that, and this is like, it's all, he said to me, you know, you can never harm a case when you speak out. However, when you don't speak out, you can probably harm it because nobody is going to know, you know, about it. They are going to forget about him in prison. Nobody is going to care. But when you are going to create noise, we are going to create, you know, a good noise. We have to create a good noise. That means strategy that is going to be smart, sustainable, because, you know, you cannot speak today and then shut off the next day. But then also have some sort of build a network, because yes, this is a Muslim sort of case, or at least I mean, terrorism is mainly targeting Muslim community, but also we have to open up to other communities who are facing and suffering from the same sort of systematic either racism, incarceration, some sort of oppression from the government and from its agencies. So I think it is important to, yes, to keep this into the sort of under the umbrella of terrorism, because we understand what the premises, we understand how this is going to, how it is handled, but at the same time we have to open up to other community and understand and get help from them and get support from them, because for example, Black communities have been under this for many years, and we as Muslim community, we thought that, oh, it happened only to them, but then they came to the Muslim as well. So today we need those sort of network among the activists, among the different communities who are targeted by these very oppressive and systematic and racist act from the government. So I think speaking out is important, and then of course at the same time, yes, the legal advice and matter and work is going to be there, but continuing this campaign, because it is a campaign. What I have, maybe I'm going to just stop here, but what I would, as a word of maybe solidarity, encouragement, the hardest thing is when you do a campaign is that you never know where this is going to get you. You don't know whether, and it is very difficult. It is a very difficult job to wake up every day and think about what I'm gonna do today. I think this is, I always compare it as a marathon. This is a marathon. You are not in a sort of a race. Yes, it can take you 1 year, it can take you 2 years, it can take you more than that. But I think no matter how long this is gonna take you, there will be, I am sure that there will be justice at the end. Yes, maybe it's easily said, but it's hardly really lived in. And of course, particularly when you are the parent and you see, how every day counts and how every, missing day of medication and treatment count. But at the same time, I think it is important to remember that if we cannot do that every day, if we cannot, continue the work, then probably people will forget about, Abdulrahman, people nobody care about. So yes, I think your work is hard, but your work is important. And people sometimes ask me, how do you find strength? How do you find to continue? I think you find strength probably, for me, I found strength in two things. In my faith, it is important to believe in something, to believe in an ultimate justice, in a kind of, a justice that is going to be prevailing no matter what. And I think this is important. The second thing is, like, I got myself, my faith from, my courage or my commitment from from your son himself. You want to help your son, from your unconditional love, from your, you love that person, you care about that person, so you will do whatever you can from that. And I think those are very important ingredients into that marathon, right? That's gonna help you. That's gonna help you every day. But also we need, nevertheless, this is good, but we need the support of others. We need the support of everyone, because, your voice is not going to be enough. We need the voice of all the other, of whoever today is on this webinar, to write letters, So maybe Khadija, you can give us homework. You tell us, you know, what we should do. Write a letter to our MP, write a letter to the Prime Minister, write a letter. So those things, maybe if you take them from in isolation, they look futile, they look, you know, simple, easy. But when you take them done by a group of people and then constantly, and then, you know, kind of every, like for a long term, this is like the drops on the rock. They are going to make really impact. And I know it is hard because you want to hug your son today, you want to see your son today, but you know what? We are going to be together in order to bring him to Canada and so he can get really, you know, fair treatment and justice be served to him. So yes, you are alone, but also it is important to think about it, that this can happen to every one of us. It can happen. It happened to my husband. It happened to your son. It happened to Yusuf, brother. It happened to other people who are here, maybe to friends. And I think it is important to understand that what can we do? We have to have a small homework.
Absolutely.
Not a lot. I mean, we are not going to change everything overnight. Maybe, you know, why not? But for waiting for that to happen, we have to start by little, and, you know, and I am sure, you know, God's will, we are going to be able.
Thank you.
Because at the very, very heart of these things, it's the belief. You believe that there has been injustice, and then for sure it will be corrected. And for sure, inshallah, there will be justice.
Thank you, Dr. Mazir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Shukran, Dr. Mazir.
De rien.
As we've heard, ladies and gentlemen, once again, one important theme that's come up again in Dr. Mazir's talk as well throughout our evening is that fatal nexus of mental illness and entrapment. But one thing that Dr. Mazir that touched, I think we all need to think about is the important part about advocacy, right? This was touched on again. That's the second message that's been touched on, second theme again that's been touched on. And finally, the third thing here before I pass it on to Imam Rafat is that this message has to be tempered with sincerity, conviction, passion, strategy that's sustainable to make sure that everybody understands the importance of this story. And this is very important. Dr. Mazir is a perfect example of articulating that story. Brother Khalil and Brother Hassan articulate different stories, how that's important. And this is the advice that we give to the Al Bahnasawy family, and the advice and homework for us is that we have to support this family within that confines of advocacy. Whether it is we talk to our MPs or, you know, leaders, members of provincial parliament, or well, mostly members of parliament effectively, but the advocacy has to be supported by us for the Al Bahnasawy family. So with that in mind, I wanted to close off the evening to give the next, the final few words in terms of speaker before I ask a couple questions of Brother Osama. I would like to introduce Imam Rafat Mohammed, who's the president of the Canadian Muslim Council, Canadian Council of Imams. And Imam Rafat is going to talk about the importance of family, religious, and spirituality support, and how can the Canadian Muslim community help Abdulrahman reintegrate. So without further ado, Imam Rafat Mohammed will be speaking for a few minutes. I'll leave the floor to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Brother Yusuf. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. I'm sorry I cannot share my video as I'm outside, so I'm unable to share my video. So I will be able to speak. So I hope that's okay with you, inshallah. So you, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, inshallah. Okay, so thank you so much for hosting me as well on this very important webinar that Sister Khadija and the Brother Osama, may Allah bless them. And inshallah, soon we will all celebrate the coming back of Abdulrahman, inshallah. As you, mashallah, I joined since everybody spoke about the importance of this hard situation that we are facing. And really, Brother Hassan and Sister Muna, they spoke about different scenarios that how some agencies trap some Muslim youth or some people into the wrong hands, and they end up accusing them with many different things. It's very difficult situation that we are facing as a Muslim community, and as especially us as imams and masajid. We are dealing with our youth, our community members, and we always working in the front line, talking to the community. How can we protect our children from being trapped or to be left out to some situation like the situation of Abdulrahman? I think everyone is now, while we are actually in the same side with Sister Khadija and Brother Osama, having this very difficult situation that they are facing, and we are all in the same line with them. We are standing with you, and we are, inshallah, our prayers and our work, and inshallah our advocacy always with you. As alhamdulillah, Brother Yusuf, you are always with us in the front line working on those things, and many in our community. So what I can say to our communities and our families, we should learn from the situation in the case of Abdulrahman. It is really a tough situation that Sister Khadija and Brother Osama are actually encountering this time, when they have their beloved son Abdulrahman, our brother, who is being taken by the agencies in the US unfairly and unjustly, being trapped into that situation, is really something to make us all think of all the time, to be so that this situation does not happen to many other Muslims. And as Sister Khadija always repeats in her talk and every meeting that she does, mashallah, she always reminds the families, it's not the case of Abdulrahman. It is a case of everyone. It is a case of every Muslim child who's born and raised here in this community and in this lovely country that we share in Canada. But though always there are always we will find negative things happening from special or private departments that trap some of similar cases to Abdulrahman, and we hope that this will be ending up, and that will never be finished until everyone speak up and talk about the danger of trapping the youth or someone with mental illness like Abdulrahman. We need to be very cautious. We need to take that as an eye-opener for everyone, to make sure that none of our kids be trapped. We should always monitor what our kids actually are up to. And anyone in the similarities of the case of Abdulrahman and your brother Sulaiman, may Allah have mercy upon him, should not happen to anyone else, Muslim or non-Muslim. We should be very careful. I think the education and the work from the imams and masajid to advise families, because parents are actually the frontline ones that deal with the children, to monitor them and to talk with them and to give them the warnings in such similar cases if something to happen. I always like to hear Sister Khadija, especially as a mother, and Brother Osama, when they talk, how emotionally they come to the heart of every single one, listening to them when they share the story of Abdulrahman and what happens with him, and how possible that could happen to any one of us. So the case is not only Osama and Khadija's case, it is every single one in the Muslim community's case. We have to be always in the same line. We have to be always to defend ourselves and our children in any similar conditions. We have to stand together, one hand, side by side. As alhamdulillah, we were successful in many other events, and alhamdulillah, very recently, the battle of Brother Yasser, when he was brought back to Canada, alhamdulillah, from Egypt. It's a winning case also for the Muslim community, who worked hard and they supported the family in their fight, and they really were brave to do the big winning, alhamdulillah, this last week. So inshallah, we will be very soon, inshallah, with our prayers first, pleading to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring Abdulrahman back, praying to him Azza wa Jal to support the family of Abdulrahman, Sister Khadija and Brother Osama. And also we learned from experts like yourself, Yusuf, and Sister Mona, Brother Hassan, and our guest from the US, Mr. Brother Khalil Meek. May Allah bless you for the work and the efforts and the insight that you have shared with us. We want to just tell our family members and those who are actually following the case of Abdulrahman, the brothers and the sisters, this is our case, this is our battle, that we have to be side by side with Sister Khadija and Brother Osama Abu Abdulrahman until, inshallah, Abdulrahman is back to Canada. At least the minimum that we are hoping, inshallah, and we are trying as Brother Osama and Sister Khadija and all their friends and families who are supporting is to bring Abdulrahman back to be his issue to be dealt with in Canada. This is very important. The Muslim community should always say to everyone, we need to bring Abdulrahman back to Canada. I always, whenever we have a chance to speak with anyone, and alhamdulillah, I think we shared with all the MPs, they have received the letters talking that this is a Canadian, he should be brought back to Canada, and then his case should be dealt in Canada and should not be left out to the US agencies to deal with it. And as a Muslim community, we should stand always whenever we are being called to sign letters or to protest or to do anything with Khadija and Osama to bring Abdulrahman. We should be always there beside our prayers, our du'as, inshallah. And we should take that as a very important example for us to deal with our kids, our youth, our young one. Is a case is not absolutely the case of Abdulrahman. It can be the case of Omar, it can be the case of Ahmed, Muhammad, any one of our boys. Our children are they are all at risk. We should be very careful to teach them and to open our eyes to what they are actually monitoring or talking to on the internet, especially on this age of internet and the open space. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring Abdulrahman back. Sister Khadija and Brother Osama, we are with you, and all the Imams are living your case, and inshallah we will be always standing with you until Abdulrahman comes back. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save him and protect him and bring him back safe to Canada, inshallah.
Ya Rab. Jazakallah khairan, Imam Rafat, for your courage, for your words of wisdom, and we look forward for the continued support of the Canadian Councils of Imams to supporting this family, Brother Rafat. I know you're always there in the front line, so Jazakallah khairan for standing with us. I thank everybody for your patience. I know we've gone a bit over time, but I wanted to just leave us with one last question that I would like to introduce our dear brother Osama El Bahnasawy before we close it off. So we just need a couple more minutes of your time. I know it's we've gone a bit past our time, so bear with us for a few more minutes before we close off. I would just like to ask one question that Brother Osama will be answering, and I think that we need to reflect on before I conclude. So I like to introduce Osama El Bahnasawy, the father of Abdulrahman El Bahnasawy. And my question to you, Brother Osama, in your opinion, what is your advice to prevent such a story happening for parents who have minors, youth that are suffering with mental illness, that have had a story like this? And what is your message to the Canadian people, to us as Canadians and the Canadian government?
Thank you so much, Brother Yusuf. Jazakumullah khair for your attendance. We highly appreciate your support and your help. Actually, in my son's case, Abdulrahman, he is a mental illness boy, and the RCMP obtained a medical record from CAMH, the Canadian Mental Health Hospital, and provided it to the FBI unlawfully. And this was before the arrest. So
Brother Osama, sorry to interrupt you. Do you mind fixing your volume? It's kind of hard to hear you.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. So sorry.
Is now the voice is okay?
Yes, it's much better. Yes.
let me repeat, Jazakumullah khair for your help and support. We highly appreciate your help and standing beside us. My son's story is actually a unique story where the RCMP obtained my son's medical records from CAMH, the Canadian Mental Health Hospital, and they provided it to the FBI unlawfully. So they are aware of Abdulrahman mental illness before the arrest. And actually they continue entrap him and they didn't pay attention to his mental or anything like that. So we actually did everything to help my son, but unfortunately the system here in Canada didn't help us as they put my son in a waiting list for over 6 months in order to meet with a psychiatrist. And actually this need to be fixed by advocate for better services for our youth and the mental illness people. My message to the Canadian public and Canadian government is Abdulrahman was a minor when they entrapped him with a mental illness when he was interrupted by the FBI and our federal police, the RCMP. Abdulrahman has no violent history. He was taking advantage of what he was manipulated by the undercover law enforcement. What Abdulrahman did based on the action of the undercover law enforcement was chatting and was told by the informant to chip some cleaning chemicals and Christmas lights, which approximately around $75. And he was charged with conspiracy and providing those material. We hope that this webinar provides a clear pictures of Abdulrahman's case to both Canadian public and Canadian government. We urge Canadian to bring our son back home so that he can supported by his family, community, and mental health services, unlike in the United States prison. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khair.
So right before we end, Imam Rafat, could you start with the closing? Actually, before he starts with the closing dua, I just like everybody, just to like to say a couple of things before he starts the closing dua. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the pain of both Sister Khadija and our dear brother Osama on the plight of their beloved son. You've heard the educational words of wisdom from our dear brother Khalil, our dear brother Hassan, our dear sister Dr. Mazir, with respect to that nexus of mental illness and entrapment, with respect to advocacy, with respect with courage. You've heard all these messages. We as a society, as a nation, as an entity, will be judged in the future. This family is laying the seeds and cultivating the seeds for a better tomorrow through their pain. It is the onus on us, as Dr. Muazzir said, our homework is to go and advocate and support them. It could be vis-a-vis sending letters to your member of parliament. It could be supporting the family in this case. We all have an obligation to this family, ladies and gentlemen. We have a duty to this family, not just to them, but to our own self, because this could have happened to someone else. History will judge us as either conformists or as brave or as courageous. We must always stand up for injustice. And as Nelson Mandela, he once said, before we start the closing dua, the greatest measure of a society is how a society treats its most vulnerable. The greatest measure of a society is how a society treats its most vulnerable. Support the family and their website and bringing Abdulrahman home in their social media. Contact myself or some of the members of this campaign personally, because we need to support this family, but also we need to do this for others to prevent them. The obligation is on you, the duty is on you. How do we want our society to be? Imam Rafat, I'll leave it to you, and after the dua, we will close off the evening. Barakallah feek to all the speakers for educating us. Barakallah feek to Sister Khadija and Brother Osama for their courage, and Jazakallah khair for all of you for giving us your time and standing with us for something that is very important for all of us. Shukran, tashakur, merci beaucoup. Imam Rafat, I leave the floor to you, and I wish all of you keep this family in your duas. I look at this brother, same way I looked at Sulaiman, Allah yarhamu. He's passed away, but we can save his life. We can save Brother Abdulrahman's life. I ask you from my own personal perspective.
آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Ya Allah, we ask you to protect Abdulrahman and to bring him back safe to his family, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. Ya Allah, we ask you to have mercy upon Sulaiman, Fakiri, and all the victims who were trapped or being unjustly killed or being arrested unjustly, Ya Rabb al-Alameen. Ya Arham al-Rahimin, نسألك يا ربنا يا أرحم الراحمين أن تعد إلينا عبد الرحمن إلى أبيه وأمه سالما غانما يا رب العالمين صحيحا معافا يا أكرم الأكرمين. اللهم إنا نسألك لأخونا عبد الرحمن أن يعود لحضن أمه وحضن أبيه سالما معافا يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك أن تحفظ أولادنا جميعا في هذه البلاد. اللهم احفظ أولادنا جميعا يا رب العالمين. اللهم احفظ أولادنا من قدرت لهم أن يولدوا ويعيشوا في هذه البلاد، فيا رب احفظهم وارحمهم واهدهم وأصلحهم يا رب العالمين ونجهم من كل الفتن يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نسألك يا ربنا أن تحفظ أخونا عبد الرحمن وترده إلى أمه سالما غانما ومن كان مثله من المسلمين في أي مكان يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك يا ربنا أن تتولى عبادك المظلومين في كل مكان. اللهم احفظهم بحفظك وأكرمهم بكرمك ونجهم برحمتك يا رب عافهم يا رب عافهم يا رب ارحمهم يا رب ردهم سالمين غانمين إلى أهلهم يا رب العالمين. اللهم إنا نسألك ألا تدع يا ربي غائبا إلا رددته إلى أهله يا أرحم الراحمين صحيحا معافى. وفي حالة أخونا عبد الرحمن اللهم رده معافا سالما إلى أمه وأبيه. اللهم رده معافا سالما إلى أمه وأبيه يا رب العالمين. نسألك ربنا أن تحفظ أولادنا جميعا بحفظك وأن تكرمهم بكرمك وأن تنجيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم إنا نسألك السلامة لأولادنا ولأولاد المسلمين في كل مكان من أرضك يا رب العالمين. اللهم عليك بمن أراد بهم سوءا أو شرا أو قادهم إلى طريق مظلمة يا رب. انتقم من الظالمين في كل مكان يا أرحم الراحمين. نسألك ربنا أن تختم لنا حياتنا بخير وأن تحفظ جميع أولادنا إنك نعم المولى ونعم النصير. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. جزاكم الله خيرا.
Jazakallah khairan, Imam Rafat. Jazakallah khairan to all of you. Please keep supporting the Abdulrahman, Bring Abdulrahman Home campaign. We have pages on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and they have a petition. They have their own page, but also Justice for Sully. We posted stuff and we'll continue to be working with this family because we don't pick and choose of injustices. We have to always stand against injustice, always. Keep this family in your du'as and support this family. Thank you so much to all of you. There will be more work left for all of us. As Sister Munaya said, we have a lot of homework to do and we must continue. And thank you for educating us, Brother Khalil and Brother Hassan, and thank you for your kind words, Brother Osama and Sister Khadija, and thank you, Imam Rafat, for your spiritual perspective. Assalamu alaikum. Have a great evening, everybody. Shukran. Barakallahu feek.